In the searing summer of 1863, while Tennessee was being torn apart by the American Civil War, a quiet horror was unfolding far from the battlefield. On the outskirts of Somerville, nestled behind a grand wrought iron gate and a mile-long cotton road, stood Belhaven Plantation, the pride of the Chamberlain family. Towering white columns, wide porches, and pristine fields of cotton gave the illusion of elegance. But beneath the surface of this southern gem lay a truth so vile, it would take over a century to come to light. 73 laborers, men, women, and even children, had vanished between 1862 and 1864. Not slaves, not deserters, but freedmen and poor whites who had come seeking honest work and never left. At the center of this dark tale was Silas Chamberlain, heir to the family fortune and owner of Belhaven. Silas was a towering, skeletal man with sunken cheeks and a permanent scowl. Known for his strict discipline and icy demeanor, he ran the plantation like a military outpost. After the death of his wife and son in a tragic fire, one that many whispered wasn't so accidental, Silas withdrew from society completely. Joining him in isolation was his daughter, Clarabelle, a fragile and peculiar woman who still wore her would-be wedding dress every July, mourning a fiancé who had allegedly drowned in the estate's reservoir under mysterious circumstances. As the war raged on and the Emancipation Proclamation reshaped the South, Silas devised a new business model. Rather than relying on enslaved labor, he offered contracts to freedmen and displaced families, shelter, food, and wages paid at the end of the harvest. Desperation drove many to sign, but these contracts held chilling clauses. Workers couldn't leave. Wages were withheld for damages, and any attempt to escape meant forfeiture of all earnings. Dozens arrived. None were seen leaving. And yet, the Chamberlain cotton yields kept rising, even as nearby plantations struggled to survive the war. What made Belhaven different was a man named Quentin Voss, a failed pharmacist and distant cousin of Silas who moved into the estate in early 1862. Voss converted an old barn into a laboratory of sorts, calling it his refinement quarters. At first, it was assumed he was producing medicine or fertilizers, but the stench that wafted from his building told a different story. Strange fires burned at night. Laborers whispered of screams after midnight, and workers began to vanish without explanation. Official records, signed by Silas himself, always had excuses: illness, desertion, even conscription by Union forces. But the pattern was undeniable. It wasn't until Reverend Eli Price, a former Union chaplain turned missionary, began keeping a secret ledger of missing workers that the truth began to surface. He tracked names, arrival dates, and final sightings. His last entry was number 39. Before he could publish his findings, Reverend Price was found drowned in the Hatchie River with stones sewn into his coat pockets. The local sheriff called it suicide, but one page from his notebook was recovered years later, hidden behind a church and book. Belhaven. Check the curing barn cellar. It reeks of more than tobacco. In 1907, long after the war and after the Chamberlain family line had withered into obscurity, a university excavation team uncovered the horrifying evidence. Beneath the floorboards of the old curing barn, long abandoned and half-swallowed by kudzu, were human remains, bones, rusted shackles, and 16 brass tags once used to identify plantation workers. Each bore only a number. Some were fused to bone, others buried in shallow pits along the orchard. The official report quietly disappeared in the state archives. The Chamberlain name was never publicly tarnished, and no formal charges were ever filed. The final nail in Belhaven's haunted legacy came from Lila Mae Carter, a former servant who had fled the estate disguised as a chimney sweep. Starving and traumatized, she arrived in Memphis with nothing but rags, bruises, and a worn leather journal, Clarabelle Chamberlain's personal diary. The entries began innocently: dress orders, team menus, weather complaints. But as weeks passed, her tone turned erratic. In July of 1863, she wrote, "Father says the new injections work faster than before. Quentin says they feel nothing. I watched today. The boy didn't even cry. 1 month later, there are too many now. We can't keep burying them near the orchard. Quentin is building a pit. Belhaven Plantation was eventually sold, then burned to the ground in 1931 by unknown arsonists. No descendants of the Chamberlains ever reclaimed it. To this day, locals say the land is cursed, crops rot, animals vanish, and in the right kind of silence, you can still hear the sound of chains dragging through cotton rows. The story of the Chamberlain Dynasty isn't taught in schools, but in the hush of Tennessee's oldest graveyards, 73 souls still lie without names, without markers, only a whisper beneath the soil, asking to be remembered.